You know someone like this. Maybe it's you. They can tell you exactly what's wrong with them. They've read the books. They've done the therapy, or at least enough of it to have the vocabulary. They'll sit across from you and say, I know I do this because of my father. I know I self-sabotage when things get good. I know I pick unavailable people because it feels familiar. They know, and then they do it again. This is one of the strangest and most uncomfortable facts about being human, that understanding yourself and changing yourself are almost entirely different projects. We like to believe insight is the hard part. Get to the root, name the pattern, and the pattern should loosen its grip. But Carl Jung spent the better part of his life working with people for whom this wasn't true. Brilliant people. Self-aware people. People who could diagnose their own psychology with startling precision, and who remained, year after year, the same. Jung had a name for what was happening to them, and it's one of the most quoted lines in all of psychology, though usually stripped of its context. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. People love that line because it sounds like a solution. Bring the unconscious into the light, and you're free. But Jung wasn't offering a technique. He was describing a much harder truth, that most of what drives us was never designed to be seen by the conscious mind at all. It doesn't live in the part of you that reads books about itself. It lives underneath that part, older than language, older than insight, running on its own schedule. So here's the first thing Jung understood that we tend to miss. Knowing about a pattern is not the same as encountering it. You can know intellectually that you have a temper. You can even know where it comes from. But that knowledge lives in a calm room, at a comfortable distance, while you're sitting there thinking about it. The temper itself doesn't live in that room. It lives in the moment someone cuts you off in traffic, or dismisses you in a meeting, or looks at you the way your mother used to look at you. And in that moment, the calm, insightful, self-aware version of you is nowhere to be found. Something older has taken the wheel. Jung called this being possessed by a complex, not in some supernatural sense, but in the very literal sense, that a part of the psyche can seize control while the ego, the part that does all your knowing and understanding, simply watches from the sidelines, arriving after the fact to explain what just happened. This is why insight alone so often fails. Insight happens in the room where you're safe. Change has to happen in the room where you're not. Jung had another concept for this, maybe his most famous one, the shadow. The shadow is everything about ourselves we've refused to look at directly. The pettiness, the envy, the cruelty, the neediness. The parts that don't fit the story we tell about who we are. And here's the trap: you can actually become quite sophisticated at talking about your shadow without ever meeting it. You can intellectualize your own darkness the way you'd describe a character in a novel. Oh yes, I have a controlling side. I know that about myself. Said lightly, almost proudly, at a dinner party. That is not shadow work. That is the shadow wearing a clever disguise, allowed to stay exactly where it is, because you've paid it the tribute of naming it without ever paying the cost of feeling it, the shame, the heat, the discomfort of watching yourself actually do the thing and not being able to look away. Jung believed the psyche does not change through description. It changes through confrontation. Real confrontation. Not, I have anger issues, but standing inside your own anger while it's happening and staying conscious through it, instead of blacking out into the pattern the way you always have. That is a completely different order of experience than insight. It's not intellectual, it's almost physical. And it is very, very uncomfortable, which is precisely why most people, even smart, well-analyzed people, quietly avoid it while believing they're doing the opposite. There's something else Jung saw, something almost cruel in its honesty. Insight can actually become a hiding place. He noticed that some of his most articulate patients use their self-knowledge as a kind of armor. If you can explain your dysfunction fluently enough, you get to feel like you've already dealt with it. The explaining becomes a substitute for the doing. You get the emotional relief of feeling understood, without the risk of actually being different. Jung would have looked at modern life, all our therapy speak, our diagnostic labels, our practice self-narration, and recognized it immediately. Not because self-knowledge is bad, but because it's possible to build an entire identity out of knowing your wound, and never once out of changing your relationship to it. One is a story, the other is a discipline. So, what did Jung think actually produces change, if not insight? Two things, mainly. The first was suffering, real suffering, not the manageable, narratable kind, but the kind that breaks the story you've been telling about yourself. Jung thought people generally don't change until the old way of being genuinely stops working, until it costs them something they can no longer afford, to lose a marriage, a health scare, a collapse. He wasn't romanticizing pain, he was just being honest that comfort rarely produces transformation. The psyche, like the body, mostly changes under pressure it cannot ignore. The second was what he called individuation, and this is the part people skip over. Because it isn't a moment of realization, it's a practice, repeated for years. Individuation meant actually integrating the disowned parts of yourself, not just identifying them. It meant sitting with the parts of you that are ugly, needy, jealous, afraid, and instead of explaining them away or performing your awareness of them, actually letting them into the room, making a relationship with them. Jung used active imagination, dream work, long, unglamorous stretches of inner dialogue, not because he liked ritual, but because he understood that the unconscious doesn't respond to the conversation the ego has with itself. It responds to being engaged, again and again, the way you'd tame something wild, not by describing the animal, but by sitting with it, day after day, until it trusts you enough to change its behavior around you. That's the part that got lost when Know Thyself became a slogan on a mug. Jung never said self-knowledge was the destination. He said it was the entrance fee, the bare minimum requirement to even begin the actual work, which is slower, less flattering, and far less quotable. It asks you to feel the very things your insight lets you talk about instead of feeling. So if you know someone who can explain themselves perfectly and still can't seem to move, or if that someone is you, Jung would probably tell you this isn't a failure of intelligence. It's not that you don't understand yourself. You might understand yourself beautifully. It's that understanding was never going to be enough. The unconscious doesn't care how well you can describe it. It only changes when you stop describing it from a safe distance and start living inside it, awake, especially in the moments you'd normally disappear. Awareness opens the door. It was never going to be the thing that walks through it.